Hello and welcome back to the next episode of the Shark Source podcast. I'm joined as always by Shaedon, and we've got a great episode coming up for you today. It has been a while since our last episode. Hopefully you guys caught our live stream of the NHL draft. We actually did pretty good for viewership on that, and it was a lot of fun to watch that. So I hope you enjoyed that if you did get to catch it. But if not, I'm glad you're with us again today. We've got a lot to talk about today. Free agency has been crazy this year. There have been a lot of big signings, and me and Shaedon are going to break down all of the most important signings of this offseason. So we're going to basically go through player by player for the big signings. We're not going to go in chronological order. We're basically going to go in order of which signing we think was like the best player, and we're going to work down from that. Then we're also going to talk about our three winners and losers from this offseason, which includes free agency and the draft. And then we'll also talk about the last big name free agent available, Mike Hoffman. So, Shaedon, which player do you want to start with? There's a few we could pick from as the most important signing of this offseason, but who do you think was the biggest signing of this offseason?
I think without a doubt it's Taylor Hall. Can I start talking about the signing right now?
Yeah, of course.
I'm pretty sure everyone's surprised that he chose the Buffalo Sabres out of any team in the league to go to.
Yeah.
But it's kind of, I guess it's kind of smart on his end. You get to play with Jack Eichel. You have a young group building there. Of course, they got Rasmus Dahlin. They got Cousins, Middlesex coming up. They got Reinhart. And, I think it's a good chance for Hall to really cash in for next year when he's a free agent, because it did not go well with New Jersey. And in Arizona, he, wasn't that good either. So, if he can put up, a 70, 80-point year alongside Jack Eichel to jack up his free agent value, it's a good idea on his end. And for Buffalo, there's no risk. I wouldn't say that they're a playoff team just yet, but to add a guy like Hall and to potentially get more assets for him at the deadline, I think it's a smart move on both sides, depending on how you look at it. But I would have thought Hall would have went to a team like Colorado or a Cup contender team, not a team like Buffalo, who hasn't been in the playoffs since like 2010.
Yeah, I think everyone was really surprised by this signing, and the more I look at it, I would say the less surprised I am. But I think everyone, especially in the days leading up to the contract, we knew Hall was going to take a short-term deal because teams are not willing to give out a lot of money due to the flat salary cap. But I think a lot of people, including me, thought he was going to do a one-year deal with Colorado or Boston or something like that, a cup contender. But he instead goes to Buffalo. And while I don't think anyone thinks that Buffalo is a cup contender, even with the addition of Hall, this gives Hall a great chance to really set a new market for himself in the next offseason, because he's going to get to play probably alongside Jack Eichel. He'll be able to rebound from last year, which was by his standards a down year, and hopefully get a bigger contract in the offseason. I know one of the main reasons he said he went to Buffalo was also to play for Coach Ralph Krueger, who was his coach for one season in Edmonton. Shaedon, I'm sure you can give us more insight on him and what he was like as a coach in Edmonton. But I think that overall for Buffalo, this, like you said, this is a win-win. Even though he does have a no movement clause, if they're doing bad at the trade deadline, I'm sure he'll be willing to waive it to go to a contender, and then Buffalo gets a lot of assets. But maybe they do make the playoffs, and then that's good for Buffalo. It's good for Eichel because, as everyone knows, Eichel is pretty unhappy, and understandably so, with the situation in Buffalo. So hopefully for the Sabres, they'll be able to make the playoffs. But even if they're not, they should be able to get a nice haul, no pun intended, for Taylor Hall at the trade deadline if they're not in contention. But Shaedon, what do you think about Ralph Krueger as a coach? And players, Eichel, but lots of different players seem to really like him as a coach. But what do you remember about his time coaching in Edmonton?
I think he had a lot of unfair treatment here in Edmonton. Like, he was fired via Skype, which is kind of, looking back on it, very unprofessional. But
Yeah.
No, he's a great players coach. His style, his system, works in the National Hockey League. You know what? The players seem to love him. Like Toby Reeder, of course, former Oiler too. Went to Buffalo because of Ralph Kruger. So obviously the players love him a lot. Um, he's a great guy. He does so much in the community. And I think that's the number one thing you need in the coach. You want the players to like you. You don't want another you don't want another Mike Babcock situation or Bill Peters. Um, and that's attractive for Buffalo as well. Um, Obviously his time in Edmonton, wasn't the greatest. Only 1 year here, but I think he's the right coach for the Sabres. For all the young kids there, and yeah, I hope he takes them to the playoffs because I'm a huge fan of Kruger. He's been here. Well, he was in Edmonton like for 5 years, and the fans seem to love him. So yeah,
Yeah, I totally agree, and I would love to see the Sabres in the playoffs, especially because they've had so little success as a franchise as of late. So it would be nice to see them finally be able to play some playoff hockey, especially Jack Eichel, one of my favorite players in the NHL. Okay, so that's that signing, and that was a big signing. Shaden, you brought that one up. In my opinion, that was not the biggest signing of the offseason. I think the biggest signing this offseason was the Vegas Golden Knights signing Alex Pietrangelo to a 7-year, $62 million contract. That was the biggest move of the offseason, and I thought that Pietrangelo would find a way to re sign in St. Louis. He clearly wanted to stay. He even said he did not rule out St. Louis until he put pen to paper to sign for Vegas. So he really wanted to stay. But St. Louis, it was clear. It was clear as soon as they brought in Torrey Krug, and it was probably clear as soon as they brought in Justin Falk last season that they were perfectly willing to move on from Alex Pietrangelo, and they did just that this offseason. So Petrangelo goes to Vegas, and Vegas continues to load up on the blue line. We'll talk about the Nate Schmidt deal and the rest of their moves they had to make to fit in Petrangelo later. But just talking about Petrangelo, Shaden, does this make Vegas the Cup favorite out of the West? I mean, a lot of people, including both of us, picked Vegas to make the finals from the West these playoffs. What do you think this move means for Vegas?
I mean, without a doubt, it makes them Cup favorites already. You probably have a top five, maybe arguably a top three defensive pairing in a Shea Theodore and Alex Pietrangelo. Their team is so deep in net as well. You got Robin Lehner and Marc Andre Fleury. Both. Lehner's a top 10 goalie. You know, in the NHL. And, Fleury has experience in the playoffs. He's a Cup winner. And you just look at the fourth as well. You got Mark Stone, Carlson, Marchessault, Pacioretty. Um, they got young kids in Cody Glass, and this is definitely going to push Vegas over the top. I felt like they needed a huge change, especially after how their last two playoff runs went. Of course, losing to the Sharks in 7 games and somehow losing to barely beating the Canucks in 7 and losing to Dallas in I believe 5 or 6 games.
5, yeah.
Yeah, so they needed a huge change, and Petrangelo's a huge ad. I believe he made. I believe he's making around 8.6 to 9 mil. I forgot the value, but you know, it's it's good for Vegas, obviously. If they choke again, the sign doesn't look that good because then you run into cap issues. But for the short term of things, it's a great win by Vegas, and hopefully Pietrangelo can get 50 to 60 points on that team, and yeah, they're gonna be scary next year.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the short-term goals because, as everyone knows, Petrangelo isn't young. He's 30 years old, so I would say just probably at his peak or just past his peak. But he still has some good years left in him, and while that contract probably will be a bad contract near the end of it, if they win one or two Stanley Cups, it will be totally worth it. So if you're Vegas, you have to go out there and make a big move like that, especially after a humiliating loss to Dallas. I mean, they really were beaten very easily when they should have won. I mean, to lose in 5 games, even though you outshoot your opponent in most of them, it just can't happen. So to bring in another great player, and again, we'll talk about the moves that they made to fit him in, and a lot of people might not like some of the moves they made, but at the end of the day, you have to do what you have to do to bring in an elite defenseman when they already had Shea Theodore. So I really like this move by Vegas. All right, Shaedon. So we've covered Taylor Hall and Alex Pietrangelo. Those were the biggest two signings of the offseason, but there were plenty of other signings. What was another one that you thought was noteworthy?
Definitely, Torrey Krug, of course. We kind of just touched
Yeah,
about that, but you know, Krug is essentially replacing Petrangelo there, especially on the power play. He's going to be huge for St. Louis. Um, but once again, it just goes back to Justin Falk. I have no idea why they extended him so early, especially with the poor season he had. That's the only question mark I have. But you know what, Krug, solid day on St. Louis. Hopefully, he does well there as he did in Boston. But I kind of want to talk about Boston in this situation. They lost Krug. We don't know what's going to happen with Chara. He's probably coming back. But their best defenseman right now is Charlie McAvoy and probably Brendan Carlo, and they have really no one else on that back end. You could say Matt Grizzlick, but besides that, it looks rough for Boston back there. And I'm really surprised that they didn't try to trade out, assets they have to keep Krug, because that's a huge loss. And, it's not like they have an outstanding prospect coming in on the back end. So, Tuukka Raska's aging. Even Halak's not that young. Bergeron's getting up there in age. Marchand's like in his early 30s. It's gonna look rough for Boston in 2 to 3 years.
yeah, and I'll get more talking about Boston when we talk about our three winners and losers of free agency. But yeah, losing Krug was a big deal, and for St. Louis, I totally agree with you on the Falk deal. I think that's going to be a huge disaster. Justin Falk, in 69 games played last year, had 5 goals and 11 assists. And this was a guy who, while sure he's good defensively, he was like, people said his offense from the back end was like important. And the year before he had 35 points, but people thought that with the Blues he could step it up even more, and yet he's regressed. He's 28 years old, and they signed him to a big contract right after they signed him. So this was a big problem for the Blues. And bringing in Krug, I definitely think it's good. He had 49 points last season. He's an undersized defenseman, only listed at 5'9", but so losing Petrangelo and bringing in Krug, you definitely are going to notice a difference size-wise. And while Krug is definitely at a much more affordable $6.5 million, I still think that bringing in Krug, what normally would be considered a good move, is dampened by the loss of Petrangelo.
Yeah,
So,
I
okay.
agree on that.
Yeah. All right. So another deal we can talk about. Well, we might get to this one later. I guess. Is there any other major ones you want to talk about?
Um, I guess another major one you can kind of talk about is the Dadonov to Ottawa
That's what
signing.
I was actually thinking of. I'm glad you brought that up.
Um, you know, kind of, what? It kind of makes sense on both sides. Ottawa has a young team they're building. Of course, he just drafted Tim Stutzel at the draft. They just added Matt Murray. You know what? That core in Ottawa is looking better and better every year. You're adding a top 64 and getting Dadonov that can get you 20, 30 goals, 60 points, and he's a solid two-way player. I love the signing for Ottawa, and I love the signing for Dadonov. Going to a young team that can make the playoffs in 2 years, I think. And terms 3 years, and the cap hit's pretty reasonable, so I think it's a solid deal.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm glad you brought that one up. But we'll touch more on I will touch more on the Sens and Panthers whole team situation later. But this deal I think is a steal for the Senators. You know, Evgeny Dadonov is a guy I've really liked when he was on the Panthers, and the Senators get him at an affordable rate for only 3 years. He was a player that I thought was definitely going to be overpaid. You see guys like him get overpaid and given too long of a deal all the time in free agency. But, you know, especially because he's 31 years old, a lot of times teams will pay players, you know, at that age, they'll give them too long of a deal, and then by the time the deal's over, they're way past their prime. So I think this is a great deal for the Senators. And the Panthers lost Dadonov. Are they going to lose Mike Hoffman, the other major free agent? We'll talk about that in a bit later. Now, again, we can't ignore the huge goaltending circus that this offseason was. There was a really funny flow chart that showed like the whole goaltending carousel. So we'll get to all the major goaltending moves, but we're going to start off with the biggest deal, Jacob Markstrom signing a 6x6, 6 years, $6 million per year contract with the Calgary Flames, division rivals of both our favorite teams, the Oilers and Sharks. And this is a deal that I personally love for the Flames. And we know the Oilers were in on Markstrom, so it has to hurt to lose out on him. But Shaedon, what are your thoughts on this deal?
I think the cap hit is perfect. 6 mil for, you know, a goalie that's been very underrated for the past couple of years, and he had Jacob Markstrom had a solid playoffs. He got a couple of Vezina votes in there. Of course, wasn't a top, in the top three, but got some Vezina votes. The only thing that scares me for Markstrom and the Flames is a 6 year term. I think I would have thought teams would have learned their lesson about giving out long term to goalies after the Bobrovsky signing. It's gonna take until he's 36, 37, and if he doesn't regress, it looks like a steal of a deal. But with how the market is nowadays, and and goalies trending now, I don't like the term. I thought it would have been better if it was a 3 or 4 year contract, but those last 2 years are probably gonna look rough for the Flames. But on for the first 3 or so years, it's a great deal. They needed a good goaltender for years. They haven't had one since Mika Kiprusoff, and it definitely puts the Flames over the edge now. Maybe Addy Marsham can get them past the first round. But it's a huge sign for them, and it's well deserved for Markstrom to finally get a contract that he's earned for years.
Yeah, I sort of disagree on even the term. I think this is the perfect deal for the Flames because Markstrom, he's 30 years old. If that was any other position, I would say the term is too long. But I think we got to remember goalies can play longer than other players. We saw Luongo was good into his 40s. Until his last season, he was still a good goaltender. We got Lundqvist is still he had a pretty good season, even though he was the third goalie on the Rangers. It was more because they had other players who were better, but he's still pretty good, and we'll get to him in a second. But I think this deal is perfect for the Flames. I thought he was going to get a lot more, especially compared to what Martin Jones gets, he's not even an NHL goalie in that contract he signed, or what Carey Price gets, or what Bobrovsky gets. But I think this was a great deal for the Flames, and the Flames have not had like a real elite goaltender. I think you said like since Kiprusoff, and I totally agree. I think this was a great move for the Flames, and it's very disappointing for the Oilers. You know, Vancouver, they're the team that loses him, but we'll get to who they replace him with in a second. But I don't think it's as bad for them. They've still got Demko, but it is too bad that the Oilers didn't get him. And the Flames, if you're a Flames fan, you have to be thrilled with this move. Okay, so that was the most important goaltending signing, but that was not the first major goaltending signing of the day. So the first major goaltending signing of free agent frenzy was Henrik Lundqvist. 38 years old, signs a 1-year, one-way deal with Washington for 1.5 million. So, what are your thoughts on this contract?
I love it. Of course, Washington was looking for someone to replace Braden Holtby, who did not have a good year in Washington at all. And Lundqvist helps in that situation. I feel like he's gonna have a better year under Peter Laviolette in Washington, and he's gonna mentor the young Ilya Samsonov. And you know what? It's low risk, high reward. It doesn't cost you that much. It's only 1 year, and realistically, this is probably Henrik Lundqvist's last year in the NHL. So to go to go to a team like Washington that has guys like Ovi, Carlson, Kuznetsov, Backstrom, Rana, Oshie, um, and try to win at least one to at least try to win a cup. I love it for Lundqvist. You know, I don't think Washington wins the cup next year, but it's a good 1 year bet for Lundqvist for sure.
Yeah, I totally agree. And here's the thing about Lundqvist. He still had it, even though he didn't have a great playoffs when he played those first two games to the Rangers. He still got some hockey left in him. And I think he went to the perfect team because I don't think there's any other team that is as close to winning a Stanley Cup, but who also would want to bring in a goalie as the Capitals. So it will be weird to see Lundqvist not in a Rangers jersey, but I think this was a smart move by the player and by the team. We're not sure if Samsonov will be the starter or not. It seems like he will be, and Lundqvist would back him up, but maybe Lundqvist outplays him. We don't know. So I'm excited to see what happens with the Capitals, and will King Henrik finally get his Stanley Cup? We're going to find out this season. I think the next biggest contract that was signed for goaltenders, maybe not the biggest in terms of money, maybe, but I think the next best goalie who moved was Corey Crawford. He signed a one-way 2-year deal with the New Jersey Devils for a modest cap hit of 3.9 million per year. So, what are your thoughts on this deal?
Um, Same thing with the Lundqvist contract. It's good for the Devils. They got a veteran goal in net to, of course, mentor the young Mackenzie Blackwood. I think it's also good for Crawford. He goes to a new team after being Chicago forever. The Devils are still rebuilding, and I think that veteran presence is really going to help that team. I think they've kind of needed that for quite some time now, ever since Patrick Elias left the squad back in, who knows, I think 2016. And it's only 2 years, modest cap hit, and Crawford actually had a really good year last year. Um, it sucks for Chicago now because they're stuck with Subban and Colin Delia, which I guess we can get into later. But for the Devils, I think it's a good deal. Obviously, the Oilers were a team who were also on Crawford, but I'll get into that in later too. But yeah, I like it for the Devils. It's a good signing.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think this was a very underrated move because there was so much that went on that I don't think enough people talked about this. But Corey Crawford was once considered like an elite goalie. Then he had sort of a slump, and no one really knew why. The 2018-19 season, he still had a very respectable 908, but then he also dealt with injuries and he had vertigo. I'm not. No one was even really sure what kind of specific injury it was, but it was something wrong with his head. But he bounced back this season and posted a 917 save percentage. Amazingly, Leonard still had a better save percentage when Leonard was on the Blackhawks, which just goes to show how good of a goalie he is. But then Crawford really turned it on in the playoffs. He basically stole the only game they won against Vegas. I believe that was game
4.
4, yeah. So he had a great playoffs, and I thought he was going to re-sign with the Blackhawks. I was pretty sure that they would keep him, but they did not. They have announced that they're rebuilding. We'll get more into that later. But so that was surprised me though that they didn't keep Crawford. And if you're a Devils fan, you have to be excited because the Metropolitan Division is stacked. Again, we'll talk about the divisions later. We don't know if they're going to be the same or not this year, but the Metropolitan Division is very tough, and the Devils had, I think, the worst goaltending in the division last season. So now they have one of the best goaltending in the division with the addition of Crawford. So if you're a Devils fan, you have to be excited. They should be in a better position to compete for a playoff spot with Crawford. Okay, the next goaltending signing we're going to talk about, Braden Holtby, signing with the Vancouver Canucks. It's a 2-year contract worth $4.3 million per year, and it has a no trade clause, but not a no movement clause, and that's important. So, Shaedon, what are your thoughts on this pretty low risk contract?
I'm not the biggest fan of it on Vancouver's side. Obviously, you kind of wanted someone else, if Markstrom left, and he did. Um, but with the season hope he had, I don't get why Vancouver thought it was a necessity to to go after him. Um, my best guess is that Holtby's only there for the year to mentor, of course, Thatcher Demko. Then they're gonna leave him exposed, and they hope Seattle takes him. But you know, I don't really like it. Holtby hasn't really been the same goaltender ever since Barry Trotz has left Washington, which I think goes to show how he's probably the best coach in the NHL without a doubt. Like, took the Islanders to the third round. But like it's only 2 years. The cap isn't that bad. Only at 4.5, I think. But I don't really understand it. I think it would have been better to let Mikey DiPietro maybe get a shot at the backup job. But I guess with a veteran like Colby who's won the cup beforehand, that can help Demko, really really become an elite goalie. I guess it makes sense. But if Seattle doesn't take him, I just don't get the move at all.
Yeah, Holtby has been in a steady decline. In the 2016-17 season, he posted an unbelievable 925 save percentage and was second in Vezina Trophy votes. Bobrovsky won it that year. But since then, he's been in a steady decline. He had a sharp drop off the next year to a 907 save percentage. And that year, he actually lost his starting job to Grubauer. And Grubauer started the first games of that Cup final run. And then once he lost those two, Holtby took over, and we all know what happened. He led the Caps to their first Stanley Cup. So we thought that his decline might have been reversed, and the year after he had a pretty good 911 save percentage. But this season it was a disaster, and he lost his starting job. Sort of. It was like a 1A 1B situation with Samsonov, but Washington made it clear at the beginning of the offseason they had no intention of keeping him. And I think that the Canucks had to let Markstrom go because there's no way they could afford to pay all their young players and him and eventually Demko. So I don't mind that they had to bring in another veteran as a mentor to Demko, but I don't know if Holtby is the right one. We'll see. Hopefully he can rebound from his bad year last season, but 4.3 million is a lot to pay for a backup goalie who is in decline and is 31 years old. So we'll see if that works out for them. And again, the reason it's a 2-year deal is so they can leave him exposed in the expansion draft. But if he doesn't do very well, I don't see why Seattle would do Vancouver any favors and take the goalie off their hands. So we'll see what happens in that situation. All right, we got two more goalies I want to cover. This was a contract that sort of confused me, just like the trade was. The Canadians extended Jake Allen for another season. He's under contract for this season at 4.35 million, and they extended him for 2 years after that at 2.875 million per year. So, what are your thoughts on this deal? It didn't really make too much sense to me.
Um, Obviously, I think we're all kind of surprised by why Montreal traded for Allen. They got Caden Primo and they got Charlie Lindgren in the AHL. Um, the move still kind of puzzles me. You know, I really don't get it. I guess they wanted to help St. Louis with their cap situation for Petrangelo, but he left. Um, my guess is that the Canadians want more insurance in case Price goes down with an injury because Allen has experience of being a starter in St. Louis before Bennington really stepped up the reins. But no, that's my only guess because Primu's still kind of young, but Lindgren's only 26, but he doesn't have that much experience in the NHL. So I get it's just probably for insurance, but at the same time, I don't get the need to extend him for a year.
Yeah, what really confused me about this whole trade and signing is I don't know why the Habs are not rebuilding. Last playoffs, they totally overperformed. They performed way better than they are. They eliminated the Penguins and they had a very good series against the Flyers. But do people really think they can do much better than that with this core? They have some nice, exciting young players that Habs fans should be excited about. But they need to do a rebuild or a retool. But with this deal, it seems like they're going for short-term success, which doesn't make sense to me. They're now paying over 14 million for their goaltending duo, which is way too much, even with a guy like Price. And Allen, this also didn't make sense for him because I thought he can be a starter in this league. He took Binnington's job in the playoffs this year, and I thought he completely outplayed Binnington in the playoffs. So I thought the Blues would keep him around. They were trying to clear cap for Petrangelo. I understand that. But I thought Allen would go to a team like Buffalo who needed a starter, but they didn't. So, but he didn't. So I don't know. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. The extension part, the only rationale I can think of is they want to expose him for the expansion draft. And that does make sense because if I'm Seattle, I jump on Jake Allen. I think he's definitely worthy of being a starter in this league. So I think that might be the only reason why they extended him.
Yeah.
Okay, the next and final goaltending signing we're going to cover is Matt Murray. So the Senators, even though this is technically a re-signing, we'll still count this. So the Senators extended Matt Murray for, let me find it, 3 years at 6.2, or was it 4 years? Sorry, 4 years at 6.25 million per year. So Murray lost his starting job to Tristan Jarry with the Penguins, and this was the guy who only in 2016 took Fleury's starting job and then led the Penguins to back-to-back cups. But he quickly fell out of favor in Pittsburgh, and now he's going to Ottawa. So Shaedon, what are your thoughts on this deal?
Um, I think the term's fine. The one thing that one the one thing that makes me say this is a bit of an overpay is just the last 2 years Matt Murray has had. After those back-to-back cup runs, he hasn't really been the same netminder. Last year, it was a horrible year. Um, but for Ottawa, you finally got a stable young goalie in the net to replace Craig Anderson. You know, of course, Murray's won back-to-back cups, and at the young age he is at, I believe, 26. That's key for a rebuilding team like them. And if you can get back to that .918, 2.5 goals against average form, it's a steal of a deal for the Sens because he can keep improving on that as he continues to age and continues to grow with the young squad that they have. But if he has the season he just had, um, it doesn't look like a good contract at all.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. Murray in 2018-19 actually had a pretty good year. He had a 919 save percentage, but last year was abysmal, an 899 save percentage in only 38 games played. Jari took the starting job, while Murray had a much worse beginning of the year. He heated up a little bit at the end, and that's why his average got almost back to 900, but still not a good year by his standards. And he could have gotten a lot more if he had had a year like he had before. What really surprised me about this deal is that he got more than Jacob Markstrom. Now, I know if you're Ottawa, you have to pay more because no one wants to play in Ottawa, even though they traded for him. But still, I don't. I think it was somewhat of an overpay for him. But at the same time, they have to. They have to sign players for more because they have been dysfunctional for a while. So we'll see if this works out for the Senators. And we'll see if they can make some noise. I don't think they're a playoff team yet, but they do have an exciting young core for sure. Okay, unless there's any other signings you want to go over, I think we can move on to our three winners and losers of this offseason. So, unless there's any other player signings you want to go over, we can move on to our winners and losers of the offseason.
Yeah, I think we can move on.
Okay, so first we'll just read out the teams we have, and then we can get into them individually. So for my winners and losers of this offseason, for my biggest winner of the offseason, and it's not really close in my opinion, is Vegas. And I'll get into them in a minute. Then my second winner is Calgary, and my third winner is Buffalo. For my losers of the offseason, San Jose, Florida, and Arizona. What are your winners and losers?
Um, my three winners are, well, it's actually kind of surprising. I have Florida as a winner. Um, I also have Edmonton as a winner, and I'll actually get into why. And my other winner, that one's actually tough. You know what? I'll come back to my third winner because I have my three losers picked out.
All right. Who are your
Like
losers?
I have Vancouver as a loser. I got, of course, Arizona as a loser, and I also got Boston as a loser.
Yeah, I would. Boston was very close. I was close to including them, but I didn't. Okay, so let's get into our. We'll go winner, loser, winner, loser, winner, loser, and We'll alternate between people. So Shaedon, you also did you also? Sorry, I missed it. Did you also have Vegas as a winner?
No.
Okay.
It was yeah. I did not have it.
Okay,
I
so I
had
don't think
Edmonton,
we had
Florida.
any of the same winners, so that's good. So let's do. I'll start with Vegas. So obviously, Vegas, their biggest move was the Alex Pietrangelo signing, which we went over. I think that alone is enough for them to win. Now, a lot of people might say, well, they gave up Paul Stastny and Nate Schmidt for less than what they were worth, and I do agree that they did do that. But the Nate Schmidt signing in particular, they probably were not planning on doing that. I know they probably were planning on giving up Stastny in order to get Pietrangelo, but they also thought they were going to get rid of Fleury, but they were unable to because of the situation with a flat cap. So while it is unfortunate that they had to give up Schmidt as well to a division rival for only a third round pick, Schmidt is not worth keeping if it means they don't get Pietrangelo. And make no mistake, if they had kept Schmidt, they're not going to be able to afford to keep Pietrangelo. Schmidt had only 31 points in 59 games last year. That's pretty good, but I think bringing in Pietrangelo makes them a cup contender. And while the players on Vegas may have loved Schmidt, he's a great locker room guy, whatever, they were not good enough to win a cup last year, and they need to do everything that it takes in order to win a cup. I think bringing in Pietrangelo does that. So I think that alone was a win. And again, people said, well, they couldn't get rid of Fleury's contract, and it's true they couldn't get rid of Fleury's $7 million per year contract, even after they extended Leonard. But here's the thing. Fleury is still a very good goalie. And while I think Leonard is a better goalie, they're going to be able to rest both of those goalies. They'll basically be able to split time in the regular season. So when playoff comes, Leonard will be able to be fully rested and ready to go. And injuries happen. So if Leonard goes down with an injury, Fleury is perfectly capable of leading Vegas to a cup. And next offseason, they'll be able to clear Fleury's contract probably once the cap goes up, and then they'll be able to bring in someone else. So I don't really mind that they had to keep Fleury around. And they didn't really do too much else in the offseason. But I think just bringing in Petrangelo alone makes them the biggest winner of this offseason.
All right, so I'll talk about my first winner. I actually remembered the other team I was going to say. So
All right.
um, one of my winners are the Carolina Hurricanes, and reason for is that they had an excellent draft, and even though they didn't really do that much in the free agent market, um, I feel like their team, is going to be good next year. They added Jesper Fast to a very low contract at 3 years at a $2 million cap hit. You know, and just the draft they had was well, they got an A+ draft. They got a lot of steals at the end with Alex Passion and Noel Gunler, and of course, he drafted Seth Jarvis at the 13th overall spot. And with the young group they have, especially on the D court with Slavin, Hamilton, you got Pesci there, Gardner, and you got your young next captain and Sebastian Aho whenever Jordan Stahl retires. No, they're probably just a goaltender away. I know they're in on Jacob Markstrom, but yeah, I think Carolina, even though they didn't do anything major free agency, I think with just the draft they have, they're the winners of the offseason. One of them.
Yeah, I think that's a great pick. My next one is Carolina, and we also pretty much covered it because I think the Markstrom signing was such a great deal. So that's the main reason they're here. But another signing that they made that I want to talk about is the Margiapane contract. They signed Andrew Margiapane to a 2 year contract, and it's got a 2,004,425 per year contract per year average annual value. And I think that was a very underrated deal for Marchapane. Now, he's young. He's only 24, I believe, years old. But he had 32 points in 68 games. And I think he's only improving each year. I remember watching him in the AHL and thinking he was going to be good. So that's just a contract underrated to watch. I don't know how much I like the Tanev contract. I think he is overpaid, the Chris Tanev deal. But taking him away from a division rival is always good. You're going to have to overpay a little to do that. So I think Calgary, but again, mainly it's the Jacob Markstrom contract. I think that really sets them up well because after their disappointing first round playoff exit to Dallas, I think they needed to do something big, and I think that was it.
All right, so I'll talk about one of my losers, and that's the Vancouver Canucks.
Oh, hold on.
Um,
I did my second winner, so let's just
oh,
go through
sorry.
all the winners and then do the losers.
All right. My second winner are the Florida Panthers, and they've added a lot of low risk, high reward deals in this free agent class. Of course, they lost Hoffman, Dadonov, which is huge, but they added Radko Gudas to a decent deal. They've added guys like Vinny Hinostroza to a 1 year, $1 million deal. They've got Alex Venberg on a steal of a deal. With the trades they made, bringing in guys like Marcus Nudavera and Patrick Hornquist, this team is going to be different next year. And of course, they've underperformed over the last 3 or 4 years. In those 4 years, I thought for sure they would have made the playoffs. But they've needed a big change, and I've liked what Bill Zito has done so far. And getting once again getting guys like Ken Strohs on 1 year, $1 million, and adding solid depth in the guys I've previously stated. I think I think that this team should be good to go, and I really think Coach Q can really get these guys going and grinding to be a playoff team. I think it's going to be a different year for the Panthers, and I think with this new group they have, they'll finally get over the hump.
Well, I'll get to my opinion on the Panthers. I totally disagree with you on the offseason for them, but we'll get to them in a second. So my final winners of this offseason were the Buffalo Sabres. Now, I thought I almost did not put them there, and I almost put Ottawa there instead. There was also some other teams I could have maybe put. I don't know. Well, maybe I could have put Vancouver for getting Schmidt, but I don't think. I think losing Markstrom was a loss. So Sabres, I was on the fence because they didn't get a goaltender, which they needed. But bringing in Taylor Hall, I mean, that has to be a win. I'm sorry. There's no way you can bring in probably easily the best forward available this free agency on a 1 year deal, and that's not a win. So I have Buffalo winning as a winner this offseason. I think Taylor Hall will make them much more exciting and competitive this offseason. But they also made some nice depth signing. I think bringing in Cody Eakin is a good move. The Eric Stahl trade, a lot of people didn't like it. I think that wasn't a bad trade. I think Stahl still has some good hockey left in him. And then the draft, it was very controversial that they selected Jack Quinn over Marco Rossi and Cole Perfetti. Me and Shaedon watched and reacted to that live. Hopefully you caught that. But if you didn't, everyone was very surprised. But the more I look at it, I don't think picking Jack Quinn was that bad of a pick at all. He had the second most goals in the OHL. And he played alongside Marco Rossi, and Marco Rossi was available. But the Sabres have center depth. And with Dylan Cousins, who is looking like a great pick, they picked him last year, I don't think there was really space for another center. So going with Jack Quinn, I think he's going to eventually. He's like a pure goal scorer, so he could eventually play alongside Eichel if Hall leaves. We'll see what happens, but I think bringing in Hall was huge for them. And if everything goes well, maybe they'll be able to extend Hall. Again, I also like them re-signing Tage Thompson. He's only 22, and I think there's still a chance he turns out well. And Brandon Montour, it was another nice 1 year contract. We'll see how that one works out for their defense. All
All right,
right,
now my
Shay, your final winner.
might be a bit biased, but honestly, with the contracts they gave out to these players, I have to go with the Oilers. Um, Obviously, they're still in the cap crunch, but if they got Kyle Turris on a tier contract worth like 1.6, and even though Turris has been trending down in the last few years, um, no, it's for dirt cheap money, and once again, it's a 2 year deal, no risk in that. And I look at Turris' previous year in Nashville, had 31 points in 62 games. Like that's still a 41-point pace over an 82 game schedule. And I think the knock on Turris is that it's his defensive game isn't the greatest. But for the Oilers, they've been looking for this third line right shot center that can have a decent two-way ability for quite some time. Like they haven't had one since we've dealt Mark Letestu out of town back in 2018. So it's been a long time coming for them. And for Turris, I think this is a decent bet on him as well. You're coming to Edmonton. You're probably playing on the power play at some point with Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. And I think that's going to boost Turris' value in the future. And I think it's a good. I think it's a decent bet on himself. And of course, you signed Tyson Barrie to a 1 year, $3.75 million deal, which is huge for Barrie as well. I'm going to use the same argument I used for Hall. You get to be on the power play. With Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, a power play that was 30% last year. You can get back to your 60, maybe even 70-point form, and you can hit out the park next year in free agency. And for Barrie coming to Edmonton on a cheap deal, that works well for Edmonton too, especially since Oscar Klefbom is going to be out pretty much for all of next year. So Edmonton's adding a lot of value, a lot of key players to their group, and it basically didn't cost them that much at all. We still have to sign Ethan Bear, which means I foresense a trade coming. But besides that, with the depth they've added, of course, they brought back also Tyler Ennis for a year at $1 million, which is a steal of a deal, to be honest. No, I like I like the moves Edmonton has done. Obviously, I wasn't happy about bringing back Mike Smith, but if you look past that, I have to give Edmonton at least a B+ on this off season.
Yeah, again, I think the only things you can really criticize Edmonton, it's not about anything they did do, except maybe the Smith contract. It's more what they didn't. So the fact that they lose out on Markstrom to a division rival and that they don't bring in a new goalie, people could criticize them for that. But like you said, I think they had a very solid offseason. I love the Turris contract. I love that they brought back Puljujarvi and they were patient and didn't trade him when his value was at the lowest. So I think this was a good offseason for Edmonton, and we'll see what happens next year. They had a very disappointing playoff exit, and McDavid, Draisaitl, their whole core is going to be fired up and hoping to get back to the playoffs this season. Okay, now to our losers. In my opinion, this is I know Shaedon said that they were a winner. I think the Panthers were one of the biggest losers this offseason, and here's why. As soon as the offseason started and they started signing lots of different players to these decent contracts, I knew that this was not going to be a good offseason for them. On the surface, the Hinostroza contract, the Gudas contract, the Wenberg contract, those were all fine. Bringing in Nudavara, those are fine. But the thing is, I knew that the reason they were bringing these players in was because they were going to let either Hoffman, Dadonov, or both of them go. And that seems to be what has happened. Now, again, all these players, bringing them in is fine. I don't have any problem with that. I also like the Verhage, bringing him in from Tampa. He just won a cup there. Here's the problem. Mike Hoffman is their best offensive player, maybe after Barkov, offensive scorer after Barkov and Huberdeau. That was one of the best trades they did, bringing him in. And he had 70 points in 82 games in 18-19, and he had 59 points in 69 games this year. Hoffman had almost, and 29 of them were goals. He had almost a 30-goal season in a shortened season. That's unbelievable, and they could lose him. I haven't heard anything about him re-signing in Florida. Maybe he would re-sign with them on the short term, but it does not look good. And then I thought, well, maybe they'll lose Hoffman, but they'll keep Dadonov. But Dadonov is actually the one who left first, and he had 70 points in 82 games in the 18-19 season, the same as Hoffman. And this year he had slightly a down year, 47 points, but still, they are losing two of their best offensive players, and they clearly need to be improving because they got trounced by the Islanders in the play-in round. So they need to make drastic improvements, and hopefully Bobrovsky will bounce back. That's a big part that they'll need. But without Mike Hoffman, if they don't re-sign him, I think this offseason was a complete failure. So we'll see what happens there. But again, the Panthers need to be improving. It seems like they're satisfied with just making the playoffs. And they didn't even do that. They just made the 2014 playdowns. So, I don't know. If you're a Panthers fan, this has got to be tough to see Dadonov go. And hopefully you'll be able to keep Hoffman. Okay, who is your first loser?
It's definitely the Vancouver Canucks. First of all, of course, they lost their big key guy in Jacob Markstrom, but they've also lost guys like Tyler Toffoli. They lost Chris Tanev. Um, you know, and actually, just saying right now, they just lost Josh Levo like 20 minutes ago.
Really?
Um,
Who
went to
decided?
went to Calgary, so it
Oh, wow.
looks like Calgary's just picking up every single Canuck available. But
Yeah.
like all these really added back is Braden Holtby, which I just criticized them for. So I can't think Vancouver doesn't have any cap space, but I blame this on Jim Benning. If you didn't have the Russell or Beagle contracts, you would have Jacob Markstrom would still be in Vancouver right now, without a doubt. It's just that bottom six I'm not sold on. You got Brandon Sutter, Louis Erickson, Russell, Beagle, like that's like what around 20-21 million like locked up in those guys. Like they're in cap issues. Of course they brought in Nate Schmidt, which is actually a decent move. But for everyone they lost, they really didn't upgrade any of their positions besides the Schmidt signing. So um yeah, I'm not a big fan of what they've been doing. So I had them as a loser.
Okay, my next loser is Arizona, and it's basically for the same reasons as the Panthers. Now they've had a lot of nice, low key good signings. I like them bringing in Tyler Pitlick. I thought that was a nice 2-year contract at a pretty cheap rate. But again, they lost Taylor Hall, and now a lot of people didn't think that they would be able to keep him But if you give up all those assets that they gave up at the deadline, and then to only take the Avalanche to 5 games and get blown out, they won one play-in round. That's not even a real playoff series. And then to get blown out in the first round, and now they're getting worse. They lose their best player, and yes, Hall did not have a very good uh, tenure with Arizona, but they couldn't even trade his rights. They were trying to trade his unrestricted free agent rights for like a fifth, and they couldn't even do that. So, and now, of course, it has to be mentioned, they lost their first round pick and second round pick next season for combine workout violations. I believe it was like they were working out players before they were allowed to. So just a total disaster. And I've heard a lot of people rumoring that they should rebuild. The problem is they have been rebuilding. This was supposed to be the point at which they come out of their rebuild and be good. And now they have no draft picks, so they can't really rebuild. They're basically stuck. So I think Arizona is a huge loser this offseason.
All right. So my second team is Arizona as well, and you basically said everything. Of course they lost Taylor Hall. The first round pick being taken away is huge. And once again, they really signed no one marquee besides Johan Larson and Tyler Pitlick. Um, I feel bad for the Coyotes, but next year is not going to be good at all. And I think that they should have at least traded one of Anthony Ranta or Darcy Kemper to fully get some picks back, some prospects to really restart the rebuild. But yeah, it's going to be a long, long process for Arizona, and yeah, it just sucks.
Yeah, if you're a Coyotes fan, it's just terrible what's going on, and I really just hope they don't lose their team. We'll see what happens. Again, they've been pushing for a new arena. They've been trying to get public subsidies to build a new arena in a better part of Arizona. Because as someone who has been to a Coyotes game, and the drive to Glendale from Mesa and the East Valley, which is where most of the people are, the drive to Glendale is absolutely brutal. And I can totally understand why people don't go to their games. And they had been pushing to try and get a new arena, but the whole coronavirus pandemic has totally derailed that. So, very tough time to be a Coyotes fan right now. Okay, my final loser of the day. It wouldn't be a Shark Source podcast if I didn't have to criticize the Sharks. And I completely think the Sharks are a loser this offseason. Again, none of their moves were terrible except for one. The move I'm talking about is bringing in Devin Dubnyk. I think that was a terrible contract. We talked about this a little on our draft live stream, but bringing in Dubnyk makes absolutely no sense. Goaltending was a huge issue for us, and I'm very happy that we moved on from Aaron Dell. That Jones contract is awful. I want to correct myself. I said Jones makes more than Markstrom earlier. That's not true. He makes a little less, 575 per year. But bringing in Dubnyk, even at 50% salary retained at $2.16 million, doesn't make sense. Dubnyk was one of the few goalies in the NHL who had worse stats than Jones. Dubnyk last year had an 890 save percentage. And that was on Minnesota, who has one of the best defenses in the league, as a backup, meaning he played the worst teams. Usually you play your starter against the good teams, backup against the less good teams. So Dubnyk, who's a backup to Alex Stalock, who is he's not a starter. He's more like a fringe starter / backup goalie on most teams. So Dubnyk was the backup to a backup on a team with great defense, and he still had an 890 save percentage. And now to bring him in at 34, even though it's only a one-year deal, makes no sense. The Sharks needed a real goalie. I would have loved to see the Sharks go out and get Lundqvist, go out and get Crawford, go out and get anyone. Go out and get Adin Hill from Arizona. I think Adin Hill is a very underrated goalie. We could bring him in. Bringing in Dubnyk makes no sense. He should not be in the league. Jones shouldn't be in the league. We have two bad goalies, and it doesn't make any sense. Also, I would say the Kevin LeBanc deal, I would say, is a bit of an overpay. Maybe it will turn into an underpay. It's sort of a risk for the team to take. We'll see what happens. I hope it works out. I don't mind bringing back Marlowe at minimum at all, and I don't mind letting Thornton walk. I think those players are basically, the fans love them. We'll see how good they actually are. I loved bringing in Ryan Donato. I thought that was a great deal, and it was sort of part of the Dubnyk trade, even though they were two separate trades. But again, overall, I would say the Sharks are still a loser for bringing in Dubnyk and not getting a real goalie, because that was our biggest problem for the past 2 years, and I don't see it getting any better.
All right, so my third team, right now I'm undecided between Boston and Chicago. Um,
I mean,
but
you could, if you want to talk about Chicago, you can, and I can talk about Boston because I had them as my fourth loser. I didn't list them, but
all right, I guess I'll talk about Chicago. Um, I, losing Crawford hurts a lot, and especially that since he just released a letter to your fan base saying, "Hey, we're gonna start rebuilding now." It's kind of like a punch to the gut for the team. With the Kane, the Taves, the Duncan Keefs that are on that team. The fact that they're actually gonna start rebuilding. It kind of hurts. It kind of hurts the team and their fan base. And you saw them kind of restart that with the Brandon Saad trade, which no, like they got back Nikita Zadorov, which the Zadorov isn't a bad defenseman by any means, but the trade a guy like Saad, but to only get back a third pair guy, isn't the greatest. And speak about Colorado, who also added Devontae, which is a great move, by the way. But for Chicago, it's going to be a long year, and especially with guys like Malcolm Subban as your starting netminder. I don't think that's something you want to do. They traded Oli Mata. They let guys like Kajula walk at free agency. It's not going to be a good year for Chicago, and it looks like the rebuild is truly on.
yeah. We saw a similar letter released by the New York Rangers, and that turned out to be a great move because now they're more ready to contend than ever, and they've got, well, maybe not this season, but with Lafreniere, Kakko, Panarin. So they're looking great, but I don't think this will work out as well for Chicago as it did for New York. But I'll talk, we already touched on them. I'll go to Boston. I think Boston is a big loser this offseason, but there is an asterisk there, and I'll explain that in a moment. I think losing Torrey Krug has to be, that's a huge problem for them. He was one of their best defensemen, and to lose him to the team that beat them in the Cup final is just another gut punch. And as you mentioned, Boston is getting older, and it's just going to get more and more difficult for them to win a Stanley Cup. Their window is slowly closing. Now, bringing in Craig Smith, I think that was a very underrated signing at 3 years, 3.1 million per, but still not worth losing Krug over. And we're not sure what they were going to do. Boston was rumored to be in on everyone, really. Even Petrangelo, they were rumored to be in on Hall, and their Dadonov, and now Hoffman, and they have lost out on all of them. If they get Hoffman, I would say they're no longer a loser this offseason. But if they are unable to land Mike Hoffman, then I definitely think the Bruins were a loser this offseason, especially after their very disappointing exit in the playoffs, because they totally dispatched the Hurricanes, and everyone was very excited about how good they looked against them, and people thought the Hurricanes were Cup contenders until Boston beat them. But then to lose so easily to Tampa, people aren't sure. Is this the Bruins team of 2019, or are they back to their early playoff exits? We'll see what happens.
Right.
Okay, so that is that for our winners and losers. We're going to wrap it up with the discussion about the new divisions that we could be seeing for next season. It's no secret that next season is going to be very different from this past season and any other season. Now, even this past season, we used a bubble for the playoffs. We will not be using a bubble next season. The NHL has already said the season's been delayed and will start around January. But we are not going to be using a bubble. That means we're going to see something more like Major League Baseball's season or the NFL, where teams are just traveling to each other's rinks. There have been rumors of like divisional bubbles, but I don't think that's going to happen. We're probably just going to see teams playing in each other's arenas with empty fans the same way they did in Major League Baseball. The problem is that unlike MLB, which only has one Canadian team, or the NFL, which has no Canadian teams, we have 7 Canadian teams in the NHL. So we can't just relocate one team to the United States like they did for one season with the Blue Jays who played in Buffalo. We're going to have to figure something out because Canada has travel restrictions, and that's one of the reasons their cases are so low. And they probably wouldn't make an exception to the NHL. So, one thing that has been rumored is a Canadian division. It would be a 7-team all-Canadian division, and this graphic, which is by Spittin' Chicklets on Instagram, basically broke down some hypothetical divisions that I think are very likely if we had this Canadian division. So, the Canadian division obviously has all the Canadian teams: Montreal, Ottawa, Toronto, Winnipeg, Edmonton, Calgary, and Vancouver. And then the other divisions were like this. The Western Division would be San Jose, LA, Anaheim, Vegas, Arizona, Dallas, and Minnesota. Then the Southern/Central Division is Columbus, Detroit, Chicago, St. Louis, Nashville, Carolina, Tampa, Florida. And then the Eastern Division would be Buffalo, Pittsburgh, Washington, Philadelphia, New Jersey, Rangers, Islanders, and Boston. So, Shaedon, what would your thoughts be on an all-Canadian division and these other division alignments for the next season?
Well, first of all, me personally, I honestly just don't see it happening. But if it were to happen, it makes sense for the league, of course, to try to keep COVID numbers down in the U.S. and in Canada with the travel restrictions. And I think it could probably do well for the revenue as well because in Canada, if it's a Canadian team versus a Canadian team, chances are someone's going to watch that.
Yeah.
And like just in Canada, you're gonna get what the bat of a bird like 8 times a year. You got Toronto and Montreal a lot. Vancouver and Calgary. It could do well for revenue. It could do better. It could make more money, hypothetically speaking, with the rivalries than a normal season. But the thing is, you know, like the thing I see happening is that I just see the NHL doing a normal 82 game schedule. Of course, they postponed the All Star game and the what's it called? They also postponed the Winter Classic. So you know, realistically, I think it's just going to be another 82 game season. They probably end around mid July. Probably a lot of back to back games, if I'm honest. And, maybe the NHL tries to get fans, maybe near the middle to the end of the year because, right now they said a vaccine could come out early 2021, which whenever that is. So, even though the Canadian division and all these new divisions sound enticing. I just can't see it happening.
This is where we disagree, actually. I think it's extremely likely that this happens, and here's why. On the vaccine, from what I've heard, while one might come out in early 2021, we won't have mass vaccination. What the experts are saying is until near the end of 2021. So over a year from now. Now that's pretty brutal because I'd been hoping that it would be at least by summer 2021, but what most people are saying now is mass vaccination and a full return to normalcy won't be likely until near the end of 2021, which would mean we would have to do a full season like this. Now, again, because of travel restrictions, having teams play in Canada from America would be pretty much impossible. We saw the Canadian government rejected a proposal from the Blue Jays, which would have teams basically just fly in, go straight to the ballpark, and go straight back. There would be no contact between MLB teams and the outside, and the government still rejected it. So I actually think it's very likely that we see this, and that we also see teams play an all-division schedule in a shortened season. Now, again, I'm sure the NHL would love to have fans in the buildings, but it would really depend on local government restrictions. I'm sure like teams in the South, like Dallas, Florida, Tampa, Carolina, will allow fans as they've done with their NFL teams and stuff. But I think most of the league will not have fans, which is a reason I think the NHL will want to shorten the season so they don't have to pay full salaries and that they can get the season done with. Because until there's a full return to a normal season, they're not going to be making money. They're going to be losing money. So I actually think these divisions are very likely, mostly because I don't think the Canadian government would approve travel between American and Canadian cities. I think we'll probably do a bubble for the 2021 playoffs. Now, this is only if a vaccine doesn't come out. Again, I hope it does, and I hope they are able to mass produce it soon, but we just never know with these things. But if these divisions do happen, I think the teams that get screwed the most are the Canadian teams because the Canadian division would be the toughest division in the league, I think. There's really only one, maybe two, Ottawa and Montreal teams that are not like very good. I think the Leafs, Jets, Oilers, Flames, and Canucks are all very good teams. So to have them all in one division, I think it would just be complete chaos, but it would be very exciting.
Yeah.
Okay, unless there's anything else you wanted to talk about, that pretty much wraps up the podcast. Was there any other topic you wanted to touch on?
Not really.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we hope you guys enjoyed this episode of the podcast. This was our first episode in a while, but we had a lot to talk about, and there's still going to be more eventually. This off season went by, pretty quickly at the beginning. Now it's sort of dragging on. I don't know when our next podcast will be. Probably not for a while, but we'll definitely talk about wherever Hoffman signs in the next one. But that would probably be the main topic. But again, we're hoping that the season starts this January. We'll see what happens though,
Yeah.
because you never know. This has been a crazy time, but we are very lucky that the NHL did get to finish their season. We awarded a Stanley Cup. It was very exciting playoffs and off season. So hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure you leave a like on this video and check out Shaedon. He will be in the description. Check out the Instagram for Shark Source in the description, and we'll see you all next time. Thank you. Bye.